Hello and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show for content professionals. Thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited to be here. I'm Scott Abel, and I'm here with my co-host, Megan Gilhooly. We'll wave to the audience. Before we get started, let me tell you a few things that you can do on today's show before we welcome our guest. You can ask a question at any time by using the Ask a Questions feature on the webinar viewing panel. We can't actually text you back, but you can send it a little text question, and I'll pay attention to them during the show, and we'll ask Kristina as many questions as possible with the time remaining. Also, there's a section called Attachments that you can click on, where you can gain information about the guest on our show. Some information is also there from our sponsor, and there's some troubleshooting information in case you've had trouble while you're watching the webinar and you need some help. You can actually go there to find that information. You'll also see that there's a special 50% offer from XML Press, a publisher that makes books for information developers. They've got a 50% off sale until June 30th on their entire library of ebooks. And there's a link in there with a special code that you can use to save some money while you're working from home and reading some books about content. All right, without further ado, let's welcome to the stage our special guest today, Kristina Halvorson. How are you today?
The virtual stage.
Awesome, yay,
How are
we're all
you?
here. Pretty good. I'm here with Megan, and we've been testing out this technology to try to have talk shows to make it interesting during times of working from home.
So much technology for talk shows now, isn't there?
Right.
It's hard to make choices.
Yes. There is.
Yep.
So I'm going to let Megan start off in this conversation, and let's see where it goes. I'll be kind of a timekeeper, and I'll also watch the chat room to see if there are questions from the audience.
Great. Sounds good.
Awesome. Very cool. So, Kristina, I just have to mention my first introduction to you was one of your talks at, Content Marketing World or something, where you had your bear slides with content strategy, where you showed the bear going down to the river to get the fish, and then you showed another bear with a really bad strategy, which was to find a fish in the middle of the forest or like the grasslands. And so
that
to this day,
without strategy, that's right.
Yes. So to this day, I like when I think of you, I think of those slides, and they were brilliant pieces of content. So
my
anyway,
work there is done. I'm glad that my legacy has been established.
It is. Very nice. So let's start off. We had a conversation about product content, and we kind of even the three of us came up with a bit of a different definition in product content. So let's start to define product content and the different flavors.
Sure.
So can you just dive into how you define it?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because, oh boy, I could immediately talk for 20 minutes about content strategy and the definitions of content strategy and how that's evolved. And Scott, you're having curated and edited a book about the definitions of content strategy. You can know that. But so, all of the different permutations of content and the kinds of content and how we use content, there are a million of them. Right now in my world of content strategy, which largely I've come up kind of through UX design and now through more like enterprise content strategy and choices there. There's a whole community that has come up through like the last 5 or 6 years, which are people who really specialize in researching, planning for, making decisions about, and then creating content that lives within products, so that lives within digital products. And then, of course, the content ecosystem around those products. So interestingly, we have content that lives within the product, which people who work on that call that product content. And then there's people that there's content that lives outside of the product that is about the product, which people also call product content. So we are hosting virtually a new conference in October called Button. And the tagline is a product content conference. And when we started talking, you immediately were like, yeah, content about products. And it was just like, that's not what that is. So interestingly, I actually went and sort of chatted with a few people within the content within products community or the product content strategy community. And they knew what I was talking about, or they thought it was something else. So again, mishmash of terminology that causes confusion and consternation, not just out there in the community, but also, of course, within organizations, especially the enterprise. So,
well, could you do one thing then on the terminology aspect?
Sure.
You said that product content can sometimes live inside the product. Could you tell our audience like an example? What do you mean when it lives inside the content?
Well, there's two different, we talked about it, that being two different things too. So when we talk about content within products, we're talking about, at least in my community, we're talking about the UX writing. So it's like the words that are chosen that help shape and fuel the user experience, that help me make decisions, that help me orient to where I am, that help me, drive through tasks. But then, of course, there's also the idea that there is content that can be suggested within a product to support the product experience, right? So that's for like support content and technical documentation and stuff that's being pulled within the product from typically an outside content data, CMS or other source. So product.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. And the reality is the product content that you're talking about, the UX words, the actual words on the GUI need to be chosen very, very well. But if one changes, then there's content about the product that needs to change along with it. So there's a synergy that needs to happen between these UX writers and the tech writers or the other writers who are writing the content about the product, whether it surfaces inside or not.
Well, and listen, that is from the very, very, very beginning, I think, when I first ever sort of realized that the work I was doing was content strategy. I really always focused on the role of the content strategist in being able to connect the dots between those different functions, right? And so when we talk about product content strategy, typically what I am talking about is the role that is kind of overseeing all of those different touch points. So not just the words within the product, but also the support content that's being pulled into the product, also the marketing content that's being written or filmed or recorded about the content, and the emails that are being sent to support both users and potential users. I mean, there are, the content ecosystem that lives within any organization around its products and services is vast, even if you're a small company.
Sure.
And having somebody that is sort of, connecting those dots and overseeing, if not orchestrating, kind of integrity and consistency and clarity throughout that content and adherence to brand values, that's really important.
Do you think error messages are things that
for sure
they get overlooked as not part of the product? And it's that's what developers do. And it's like, well, until you use the product, then you realize this is supposed to be useful for me.
I just posted the other day this error message that I got on apple.com, and it was like bad argument. That was nice. Came up, and I can't remember if that was. That's helpful. It was literally like bad argument, and I was just like, "Well, I didn't even say anything. What do you mean?"
Right. Trying to be argument.
That's not only is messages. Bad error messages are like a fallback source of hilarity for content strategists. You know that.
Yeah.
Sure. Not only is that one not helpful, but the fact that it uses the word argument, which obviously is different in code than what we think of, but it just brings up this idea of you're arguing with me, right? Anyway.
For sure. And that I think is the realm of the UX writer, right?
Yes.
Which has been technical writers in the past. But these are folks that actually, instead of sitting off in development now, we're trying to sit at the table during the design process so that these touch points are not overlooked as part of the coherent user experience.
Right. Yeah, because the user experience is always going to somehow include errors at some point, right? You're not going to get rid of the errors. So let's make the errors less egregious, I guess.
That's right. So, or at least make them the same everywhere. It's really frustrating as a consumer when there's conflicting information, because then you're forced to decide. And, sometimes with payroll, should I do this or should I do that? This one says to do it this way. This one says to do it that way. And now I have to call somebody because I can't decide, or I just don't do it.
That's right.
Or you disengage. Yep, exactly.
Right. Yep.
So one thing that you said, Kristina, that really grabbed me was you said content is how the customer experience is operationalized. And I love that phrase. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I have been thinking a lot. Before all I thought about was the pandemic. Before then, I was thinking a lot about, not sort of like the separation of the conversation around user experience and customer experience, and how the idea and the customer experience journey has really sort of been claimed or adopted by technology, right? Or even sort of shrunk down by marketing. Marketing kind of like claims everything, don't they? Come on, marketers, let's work in this together. But so, and just really thinking about how oftentimes when we talk about customer experience, it comes down to brand and service and product experience and the technology to tie it all together. And what I think has been overlooked, not surprisingly, over the last several years, is the role that content plays in terms of fueling and tying together all of those different touch points across the customer experience life cycle. And I think that is when I have railed about against content marketing, which I no longer do. Content marketing, important, we're doing it right now, is that the content focus was always up to, awareness and engagement. And then it just kind of fell off a cliff, right?
Yeah.
And really, we need to be considering the content life cycle all the way from that first point of, that first awareness or first touch point, all the way through to the challenges that people are going to face, the decision to refer other people to use the product.
Right.
The content that we're providing to call centers or email support or chat support. I mean, that all has to be kind of choreographed and pulled together. And without those words or those information assets, what is the customer experience? We can't do it. We can't do it.
Right. When it's seamless,
and
when it's seamless, right, as a consumer. And so when your gut tells you something's wrong, it seems like when your gut tells you something's wrong, that's the moment in their life cycle that they failed to see it. And it might not be that they were, intentionally putting their efforts into something else. Sometimes I think they just don't understand that those things could happen to a customer, and so they don't make it a priority to fix them or to plan for them.
Right. And that is the value, of course, of the user experience practice and field.
Right.
Is that these are the folks who come to the table and who have been trained in, to continually step into the end user's shoes and sort of scan the horizon for pitfalls and opportunities and obstacles, so that they are not taking their eye off of that user experience or larger, the customer experience. And I think that, do we have customer experience strategists? Do we have, we have chief customer officers? These folks are really talking to the consultant, paying attention to the consulting firms that are selling them technology. And as we know from way back in the day, technology does not fix the content. Fix the content.
Yeah. So the outcome of not paying attention to content throughout the customer lifecycle really is that it's a big trust buster, right? So
exactly, for sure.
Well, we had an example at a company I used to work at that is very large that I'm not going to mention. And in essence, we had our customers.
I can go on LinkedIn and find out what it is, right?
I know. I know. It'll be obvious. So anyway, we had customers that were basically giving us really bad ratings on consistency of our content. Sure. And when we dove into it, we recognized we were able to get down to basically the help content was here, and the content that support agents surfaced was over here. So the stuff that came up to support agents, the snippets that they then sent out, they were both here and here.
Right.
They were supposed to match, and my team was supposed to write both. What we found out was happening was the support team was actually not surfacing our content. They were surfacing their own. And so when we got out to it, we were able to see not only that it was the fact that the content and the words that support agents were giving were different than the help content, but we were able to see that there was one call center in the middle of India. And we were able to like get it down to one team under one manager where it was the biggest offender, right? And so it was so clearly a trust buster. And this was all done in the realm of of trust, and it was all about content.
Sure.
It was incredible.
Do you think that because we work in separate silos and we also have separate identities, when we have a different title than somebody else, maybe that sets us up to think we're a little different, and until somebody brings that awareness that we are all connected. For example, in Megan's example, if the people writing the documentation and the support materials were in more contact with the support team, maybe the support team could tell them why they were rewriting content on their own.
Right.
Yes. And it would, then everyone could change and it could be better and faster.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's an argument for some sort of a centralized content strategy function, right?
Yeah.
Where content strategists really have identified and understand and are responsible for core principles, for why we're creating content in the first place, who we're trying to serve, how we're going to do it. They understand and own some kind of a style guide or pattern library for content. If there is a centralized source of truth, like content, whether it's a content management system or some other networked ecosystem of content resources, then great. But then those should be the folks that are helping go, you over here and you over here. You all need to be talking to each other because maybe you've got redundant efforts, or maybe you're trying to accomplish the same thing, but you're, in conflict. And that's exactly what you did. You played the role of the content strategist, and you went in and dug into what we call the situational diagnosis, understanding what the situation is, where the pain points are, and digging into, finding out where the root problem was or the root cause. So
exactly. And that was the point. There's a question that's really relevant to this, and that is from the audience. Why does support want to write so much rather than use the technical documentation? And I can say from my standpoint, at least in this case, it was because support folks were gold on the CSAT score that they got back from their customer, and they believed that their own words would please the customer more than the technical documentation words would. And so that's why they were doing it. So when we finally went to them and we could prove to them that that's actually not the case, because they were, misspelling things and using vernacular that with an American audience, they were using vernacular that didn't sound American, that actually was displeasing them. We were able to sort of turn that around. So hopefully that answers that question for the audience. But
on the flip side too, though, I would think that part of that conversation would be to work to build trust for the technical documentation, to be able to show, look, when people do go to the technical documentation, they are actually finding what they're looking for. It is clear, it is in plain English. They do have clear steps that they can take to solve their problem. And, the argument to be made there is that if the technical documentation was working, they would never have contacted support in the first place. So that I think is another really, candid conversation that needs to be had.
And we have to be honest about that too.
That's right.
We just all nodded our heads to something that we don't have scientific proof of. So from a common sense perspective, it totally makes sense that if the answers were right, people wouldn't call support.
Correct.
But in a science-based environment, we would do what you said. We would take the situation and analyze it, and we would have data, and we might find out that a small proportion of our customers will call support anyway. My father,
absolutely.
He says that my dad admits at a certain price point, you owe him. If it costs $8, he said, I'm throwing it away. If it's an $80,000 car, you should answer the phone, even if you don't use your website.
Correct. Correct.
And that's interesting, because sometimes the content isn't the problem. It can be the clearest content ever, but if it's about a policy that people hate, and this was a big trust buster too. You have a policy, people hate the policy. The more clear the technical content is about the policy, the more likely they're going to call, because they just want to tell someone they're pissed off about the policy.
Of course.
Right.
Yep.
And so
and that's not a content problem.
That's not a content problem, but it
Yeah.
becomes a content problem, and it's a tough one to deal with.
Don't you think it goes to the journey problem that we have too, Kristina, that sometimes the journey is imagined by the department that's creating the content? For example, marketing envisions in their imagination a situation in which they compel someone to purchase the product.
Sure.
So their whole journey is designed to get you through the sales funnel to, completion. But if you're meandering down the path and then take a diversion and then come back in again, you come in at maybe at a different stage than they anticipate. And so that's why, for example, that error message to you, somebody pointed out that was probably a code problem, not a content problem. And my argument is it's part of my experience. So it's your content problem that your coders introduced.
That's right.
Because the error message can be controlled. They can say, if this, then display that message.
Right. Yep.
And so we have to figure out, how do we get our content to be part of other people's vision of what's important? And so this is a question from the audience. When working with product teams that don't do pre-release testing of everything, how do you convince them of the value of content strategy when they think it's not really that big of a problem?
Listen, the only way, there's two ways to do it, right? And the most effective way is to be able to get a user in the room, or film user or whatever, or, and help them see firsthand how bad content gets in the way of people using and enjoying the product, period. And we have said that, keep saying we, Scott, because we go,
sure.
We have said that about, demonstrating the importance and value of good content for well over a decade. Like the best way to show anybody is to show them, here's what happens to your user's face when they come up on this crap content, or these words that don't make sense, or your technical jargon, or your marketing fluff, right? So that's the first way, is to be able to show, here's where the content is broken. Here's where drop off occurs, for example, or here's where the content is broken. Here's where they sent an email for support. Right.
Do you think it's also that it's harder to, like, there's an argument right now that when there's a shortage of bandwidth, some companies are recommending that you turn off the video, but behavioralists are saying, well, wait a minute, that might be a good sacrifice to give you a little bit of bandwidth, but you're actually cheating yourself of information from the nonverbal cues that you're going to get from the people that you're having a call with. So maybe have fewer people on the call so they can see the look on your face. So my question would be, do you think they would treat it differently if every time there was an error, there was a video of what that person was experiencing?
Sure. Well, especially if the user was just like, I don't get it. What are they saying? What does this mean?
Like when that bad argument thing came up, the look on your face had to be great,
Right. Or I was using a new desktop app yesterday, and this message popped up, and it wasn't even an error message. It was like, oh, were you expecting this one thing to happen? That's not going to happen. And I was just like, oh, and I know that my face was just like.
So what's really bad about that is they knew what the user is expecting, and they went a different direction.
Yeah.
And then use content to make up for a bad decision.
That's user shaming, right? And we've all had that before.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, oh my gosh.
Speaking of shame, it's a shame that we haven't all been able to come together and use the same exact terminology, but we've somehow managed to cobble together some best practices. So here's a question from the audience for you, Kristina, that I think is super easy to answer. Where do IAs, or information architects, fit into content strategy? Mm-hmm. Sometimes they feel left out.
Well, a guy I worked with for a long time, Scott Kuby, who wrote a book called Writing is Designing, and is actually a former Brain Traffic employee, was really, really passionate about the importance of separating roles from job titles, right? And what I would suggest, and what I have seen through the years, is that somebody with the title of information architect is often doing the role of a content strategist, or, doing content strategy within their work. Similarly, as a content strategist, I've done plenty of IA in my life. And what I would suggest is that, when we talk about kind of how content strategy ties in different roles or practices or functions within an organization, structure is an important thing that that's a conversation that the content strategist should be involved with, because the content strategist has a deep understanding of content substance. So, the hole that we would fall down all the time when I was a website copywriter was that I would be brought the sitemap or the wireframes or whatever, and it would be a bunch of lovely labels that were very well categorized, or I would be brought, a taxonomy that I was responsible for implementing across a bunch of different content. And there would be a complete disconnect, or there would be a huge gap in understanding between what this content was called and what it was and what it needed to do. And so that is where those two roles need to be integrated in the conversation. So having said that, as a content strategist, doing deep dive content models hell no, I'm not doing that. Like I'm calling my architect.
Nice.
So
Someone else asked about roles. Sorry, Scott. Someone asked about roles in terms of, do you see technical writers developing UX writing skills, or do you see them as separate roles with no overlap?
Oh, I think that it totally depends. I mean, it depends on what's needed within the organization or within a product or a team. I think that it depends on what that individual is really interested in and focused on. I think that the idea, that someone who is really well versed in technical writing can just flip over to the role of a UX writer and vice versa. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. I think that there are commonalities in terms of wanting clarity, wanting to help people step through tasks, et cetera. But, the role that you play as a technical writer and who you're working with and how you're working versus the role that you play as a UX writer and who you're working with and how you're working, or you should be working if the organization lets you. They're two, they're separate but related things.
Right.
Do I think that somebody who's a great technical writer can't be a good UX writer and vice versa? No, of course not. But it's important to acknowledge that they're different.
And the skill is they need to be able to work together, respect each other's craft, and come up with the best results, not their own results, but work together to make sure that they get the best customer experience.
Well, and the best way to do that is to understand the end user. Right. And to understand what their core needs are. Yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, that is really something that a lot of organizations do not take the time or invest the research in to truly understanding. Like that is always a blocker when I go in to talk about content strategy for a website or for a content marketing program or for even an enterprise team. Is I say, we've got to understand business needs. We have to understand brand values, and we have to understand user needs and preferences. So let's talk about those. And people just, that is where they don't know.
Yeah, right. Agreed.
One of our viewers asked me to say hello from Philadelphia to Kristina. She also says that her comment was, that was easy, which is her best description of her experience logging in today, because last week her login to this program was not as easy, so it wasn't a positive. She said that was important to her.
Great.
Another person asked if copywriters fill into that description you were talking about earlier, because some people say I'm a UX writer, but some people say I was a copywriter for 20 years before the word UX or the acronym UX was even used.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I think your argument is that you just have to come to the table with the right skill sets and the right opportunity, and you can fit yourself in if you learn the things that are necessary.
Sure. And again, it comes to role. That was, I think, when we started talking about content strategy, or when I wrote content strategy for the web, these many years ago, I took a lot of flack from people who were just like, I've been doing this work for blah, 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 and these are just copywriters that want to get paid more. And I was just like, this is coming at content from an integrated perspective, not just from here's what I want to tell you, or here's what I want to convince you of, or here's what I want to support you to do. But we are really looking at it as like a holistic business asset that should carry somebody and fuel your customer experience. And so, the turf battles and I've been doing this and that's not what it's called. Blah, blah, blah. I don't have time for that. Like, understand your role on the team, understand, what you're being asked to contribute, understand how your performance is being measured, and keep your goals and your end user in mind. Like that's it. That's all.
Exactly.
Do you have a hard stop at the half hour?
I don't know. Let me check my calendar.
If you go a couple minutes over,
my daughter's trying to get a hold of me. That's all I know.
I've arranged.
I think we can go over. That's fine.
I can arrange for the program to go over by a couple minutes, which is good to know because we have 30 seconds left. But
I can go in
30 minutes. So let me say before Megan asks you an additional question, and we get you to talk about your conference as well. Since we can go over a little bit, one of the questions from the audience was, could you circle back on your convincing folks that don't value content strategy? What kind of technique, somebody wanted to know, would you use to help them see?
Sure. So there are a couple of sort of tried and true techniques, and none of them are sexy. One thing I'll tell you first that does not work, which is putting together a really, well-articulated presentation about what content strategy is, why it matters, who should be doing it, and how you can help. Nobody is going to listen to that. Nobody's going to care about that. There are a couple of ways. The first one is just doing what we call stealth content strategy, which is sort of like inviting yourself to the table and starting to ask questions that help shape people's thinking differently. That is, asking good questions is the superpower of anyone who is interested in doing, doing content that is focused on the user. Gentle, challenging. And I think what we all agree here, that's the first thing. I think the second thing is simply, as Megan, you've said several times, is winning people's trust. And part of how you do that is you get together with people one-on-one and you say, tell me what's important to you. Tell me what's working. What's on your mind? What are your hot topics? What are you worried about? And then just listen. And if they feel seen by you, then they're going to be more open to your input and ideas. Sorry, can you hear that? That's my little automatic cough.
That's all right. It's a great segue for me just to do one thing before Megan asks you another question. So I wanted to thank you for joining us today and let our viewing audience know that if you joined a little bit later in the program, you can ask a question using the Ask Questions tab, and we'll answer as many as possible. And also, the second most popular question is today's show being recorded? And the answer is yes. If you return to the same URL that you're using to watch today's live show, about a half an hour after the show ends, you'll magically be presented with a recording that you can view on demand. And by the way, today's show is sponsored by Zoomin Software, which seamlessly integrates documentation into Salesforce so that people can find the answers that they need without leaving a Salesforce platform or your application or anywhere that your content is being served up. This improves self-service and also helps agents assist customers to more effectively serve those that they need to. If you want to learn more about Zoomin Software, you can point your browser to zoominsoftware.com. All right, Megan, take it away.
All right. So one other thing I wanted to touch on is you had talked when we had our little conversation, you had talked about the importance of a single source of truth. And I wanted to kind of get your perspective on what that means.
Well, I think it can mean a lot of things. I think that importantly, if we are going to create a consistent and clear content across all points of the customer journey, you can't have people solely operating in silos, making their own decisions based on the things that are important to them at the point in time where they're trying to serve the customer or make the product go or whatever. That there has to be a team or so a lot of people talk about, centralized documentation is going to fix it, or, centralized CMS is going to fix it. That is not going to fix it, right? What is going to fix it is having a person or a team of people who are really clearly empowered to continually bring principles, bring guidelines, bring best practices, bring people together around better outcomes for the customer as fueled by content. And so where that single source of truth lives, I don't care so much, right? Like there are a million different ways to create and share documentation. What's important is the process around that and how we're continually guiding people back towards that single source of truth, which can include a style guide. It can include content pillars and principles. It can include, support content that we are using and pulling from, and that's what it is. And, that's a struggle with any size organization. I mean, we're in the process of transforming our big in-person event Confab into a virtual event that is happening on Monday, the next week. And there are, 15, 16 people involved with it. And we've got documentation spread out all over Google Drive that we're constantly trying to wrangle. And so it's a function of a human being and with good tools, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. And I love that you admitted that developers shouldn't necessarily be working in the same authoring tools as marketing people. That you're just never going to make that work, right? So find a way to let them author where they need to, but channel the customer experience with the content through, a middle ground. I love that you brought that up. I think one of the
to be in that situation where you're like, wow, are you kidding me? I just got used to doing this conference at the clip I've been doing it at with the human beings in the buildings that I'm accustomed to, and now this.
Yeah. It's been I actually had another conference organizer who literally decided to hold made his conference virtual in 8 days or something.
Yeah.
Say, you're in way worse shape because you have 5 weeks.
Wow.
So you've had time to think about it, and you have time and it is hard. It is hard and it is painful. And, I was saying my beloved employees and I have, clashed and there's conflict. But as I have said over and over, what keeps us focused and keeps us moving down the path together is that we all share the same principles, which is that we are passionate about content strategy. We think it's critical to make sure that our speakers, sponsors, and attendees all have an extraordinary experience. And we don't, and it's a community. I was saying, Confab is a community event more than it is a big flashy production. And so just continually trying to hold those values front and center is what we're trying. I will tell you, I do not recommend what is happening right now to anyone at all. I'm really proud. I'm really proud that we're still hosting Confab on Monday, but oh my God.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's going to take a while for everybody to recover.
Consumer expectations will have to shift a little bit. What I was agitated by previous to this pandemic needs to be adjusted a bit, right? And I think that's probably true of all of our audience members.
That is, I have repeatedly reminded everybody, we've got to get to good enough. We've got to decide what can be sacrificed and what can't be sacrificed. And we need to be comfortable with the things that can.
Have you had to say it's okay to not feel the way I normally would sometimes? Because I found myself being agitated and then having to say, this just doesn't make sense really in the scheme of things. I could wish it were better or different, but we just need to do the best job that we can.
Yeah. I actually have on a board written over here, you are doing the very best that you can. And it's for me and it's for my kids and it's for right now. Yeah, that is, I think that the ongoing practice of self-forgiveness and self-compassion right now is just critical because we're all falling down and getting up again. We all.
I'm gonna give some applause for your team because making it through all this is hard enough without having to have a job that's changing dramatically. So good kudos and lots of applause to everybody who's
thanks.
Yes.
Yeah,
and the idea of homeschooling our kids.
Yeah, I know.
That's where I just say to the teachers, I'm like, we're doing the best we can.
We are doing the
and
best
if they don't get on the call, they're not on the call. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I would also like to acknowledge too the folks who have lost jobs in the economic crisis, and just say that you are also doing the best that you can. And looking for a job while balancing terror and exhaustion and grief from this pandemic, you're doing the best that you can. So
yes. Agree.
Well, Kristina, you did have one topic that you talked to during the pre-show with Megan and I that I wanted to see if you wanted to touch on briefly, and that was you had an idea about how you might write another book in the future, and there was some topic. If you feel comfortable talking about the topic.
For sure. And I will say I was really, really gearing up and just starting my research literally like 2 weeks before we had to go home. And do this with Confab. So the book is on hold. But I'm really, really excited to dig into this idea of companies who are getting customer experience right and how content lives as a function within those organizations. Because again, I think that there's so much focus on product and service and brand, and technology, and not nearly enough on the content. And so, however that operation is set up within organizations, I'm looking for kind of shared principles and patterns and org structures and roles. And I'm just really excited to be able to dig in and understand those and sort of surface commonalities to share with folks.
If people have things to share with you on those topics, or they'd like to contribute in some way to your research, is there a place they could go to give you an idea?
Hit me up on LinkedIn for sure.
Right.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Megan, do you have any closing questions for Kristina today?
No, I think we've covered all my questions. There are a lot of customer questions or audience questions that we haven't gotten to, but hopefully they'll reach out to us on LinkedIn and we'll get answers to them. And thank you so much, Kristina. This has been super fun.
Yeah,
you're just such a delight.
Thank you. Oh,
very good.
For you.
I appreciate both of you for making time today. So thank you for doing that. I know our audience does as well. And we'll reach out to you and give you information so that you'll know which customers wrote and asked some questions. So maybe you could do a blog post or something later.
Sure.
And I wanted to thank Zoomin, our sponsor, and tell you a little bit about them before we leave today. Leading brands rely on Zoomin to help customers and employees and their partners find all the right information that they need, where and when they need it. Zoomin's platform does this by unifying your product content and making it available to places like Salesforce and even inside your product, as Kristina talked about today, with a host of features that personalize the user experience and provide you with valuable business insights. Zoomin powers next generation content experiences. All right, that was a mouthful. Request a free consultation today and visit Zoomin Software on the web. You can also click the attachments section and click on a link that takes you right to their software website where you can learn more about it. There's also some content in the attachment section that you can reach out to Kristina. So if you'd like to check out her conference or her website or her LinkedIn profile, please do so today. And thank you to the audience members for contributing and asking questions. I really appreciate your patience. And luckily we didn't crash during this show. And I think we broadcasted for a solid half hour without anybody being disconnected. So we owe some applause to the internet gods today as well. All right, thanks everybody for joining us on today's show. We'll see you at another show in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.